Welcome back to NC Realtors Redefined, the NC Realtors podcast. On this episode,
fair housing is a federal law that protects consumers from housing discrimination. If we don't abide, these laws can be enforced by federal, state, and local governments, as well as private litigants.
But first, do you have feedback on a story or topic that you'd like to hear covered on this podcast? Then give us a call at 336-550-4437. When leaving your voicemail, be sure to tell us your name and where you're from. Your comments may be used on a future episode of NC Realtors Redefined.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Savannah Reagin, and I'm the Education Director at NC Realtors. Our two speakers today bring a wealth of experience and insight to today's topic. Alexia Smokler leads the National Association of REALTORS Fair Housing Policy efforts, oversees NAR's ACT initiative centered on accountability, culture change, and training, and played a key role in developing Fair Haven and Bias Override. Joining Alexia in today's conversation is Tikola McCree, a passionate real estate professional with North Group Real Estate in the greater Charlotte area, and a dedicated advocate for fair housing and diversity. With nearly 2 decades of experience in education, Tikola brings a unique perspective on mentorship and community empowerment. She currently serves as the 2025 Vice Chair and 2026 Chair of the NAR Fair Housing Policy Committee and is an NAR approved instructor teaching many of our At Home with Diversity and Bias Override classes in North Carolina this year. Alexia and Tikola, thank you both for taking time to speak with our members today. The floor is yours.
Hello. Hey, Alexia, how are you?
Hey, great to see you, Tikola.
It is so good to be here with you, and I'm super excited. We've known each other now for a few years, right? And what I absolutely love about you is that you are always honest and you continue to keep it real. And that's what I love, and that's what I like to do as well. So to all my friends out there, hello, NC Realtors. If you're new members watching and you haven't taken a fair housing class, let's just start with the basics. Are you okay with that, Alexia?
Let's do it.
Okay. All right. So basics. What is fair housing? Can you just share that?
Absolutely. Well, thanks again to NC Realtors for inviting me today. I'm so excited to be here in conversation with you, Madam Vice Chair. We always share a lot of insights and a lot of laughs. So what is fair housing? Fair housing is consumer protection. So federal, state, and local laws protect consumers' ability to access housing without being turned away because of their personal characteristics. And you've probably heard of these protected classes if you've taken a fair housing course. I'm going to just flip this a little bit and change the order, just to see if it hits you a little different. So these laws mean that it is illegal to turn someone away from housing because they have kids in the family, because of their religion, because they have a disability, their race or color, their sex, including sexual orientation or gender identity, or because of where they are from, their national origin. So the Fair Housing Act says you cannot be turned away from housing for any of those reasons. And it covers real estate sales and rental. It also prohibits discrimination in housing-related services like mortgage lending, property insurance, and appraisals. So just to summarize, the Fair Housing Act says that in America, we believe no one should be denied housing because of who they are. This is a statement about our values as a nation, but fair housing is also about a well-functioning marketplace. If qualified buyers are being turned away because of personal characteristics that aren't relevant to the transaction, then we do not have the free and efficient transfer of property. We have a market failure. And we have numerous studies showing that when discrimination unfairly denies people opportunities, that shrinks the size of the economic pie for everyone. So we all lose.
And we like economic pie, don't we?
We like all the pie we can get.
That part. So there's another discussion that's been kind of, around lately, and that's the discussion lately about DEI. So I would love for us to get into it a little bit. Is DEI the same as fair housing? Can you kind of
No.
shed some light there?
No, they are not the same thing. Fair housing is a federal law that protects consumers from housing discrimination. State and local jurisdictions also often add additional protections to that federal law, and all housing industry participants must abide by these laws. So they're not optional. If we don't abide, these laws can be enforced by federal, state, and local governments, as well as private litigants. Of course, the Realtor Code of Ethics also pledges realtors to provide equal professional service to all clients and customers, regardless of their identity. So fair housing is all about consumers and consumer protection, and that's what makes it different from DEI, which typically focuses more on us as an association. Are we diverse? Are our members having a seat at the table? Those are DEI issues. Fair housing issues is about consumers.
Okay. So would it be fair to say one's more internal, one's more external?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right. Thank you for clearing that. So if I can, I'm going to move on to the next question and kind of gets us on into our next kind of phase. So we're talking about the law, right? Since fair housing is the law, can you tell everyone why we have that law, why we have fair housing laws?
I think it's really important for people to understand why these laws were passed in the first place. They didn't just come out of nowhere. Before these laws were passed, housing discrimination in this country was extremely widespread. Government and private actors denied housing to Americans just because of their background. So there were two massive federal investments in home ownership by the federal government during the 20th century. One was right after the Great Depression, and one was right after World War II. So it was federal policy to support home ownership. The federal government said, yes, we like home ownership. It's good for families. It's good for communities. We want to support it. And so the federal government decided during the Great Depression to bail out 1 million defaulted mortgages. And they created then the fixed rate long-term loan. Before this time, most mortgages required a 50% down payment and had to be paid off within 5 years. So around the time of the Great Depression was when the federal government said, we're investing in home ownership, we're going to create the FHA, we're going to create these programs and these long-term mortgages so that more people can become homeowners. So that was the first big federal investment, was during the Depression. This happened again after World War II, when the returning GIs were coming home. They wanted to start new families. There wasn't enough housing. There was actually a housing shortage for the returning GIs. And so the federal government invested massively both in building new housing for the soldiers, and most of this occurred in the suburbs. And also, of course, the GI Bill. So both building the housing and also financing the mortgage for the housing. And because the government backed the construction, the prices were subsidized and very affordable. So just, working class folks coming, GIs coming back from the war could afford to get into these houses. Now, so these two programs, the Great Depression and World War II, made tens of millions of Americans homeowners. It was like a huge injection into home ownership for this country. But these programs were all racially restricted. So these programs were for white people only. And they went on for decades. They went on for 50 or 60 years, that like all FHA 98% of FHA mortgages went to white people. So these policies made heavy federal investments in white neighborhoods and shut other neighborhoods out. And so the families who benefited from those programs were able to build up wealth in their families and pass that down generationally. And we all know about, investment, the time value of money. The longer you hold money, the more money you have. But in many of those excluded neighborhoods where the federal government wasn't investing, where people couldn't get a loan, not only were those home ownership programs not available, but also local governments were not paving the streets, collecting trash, putting in water and sewage, electric streetlights. They would cite polluting factories and industrial uses there. And so these generations of homeowners missed out on those opportunities to build wealth through home ownership. Now, I want to point out that a lot of folks were able to, against the odds, become homeowners, become business owners. And unfortunately, in many cases, some of that wealth was lost because of eminent domain and other things that were done to like build highways and modernize cities. So there are tens of millions of people who have a head start and their descendants, and other folks who are starting from behind. So if it's okay, Tikola, I'd like to share a couple of slides with some of our data, just illustrating what, these impacts of this history.
Please do. We would appreciate it. Thanks so much.
All right. Can you see this?
Yes, we can.
So this shows home ownership rates by race since 1940. And I hope, can you see my little my little mouse moving around?
Yes, we can. We see you guiding us through.
So you see this gap between, and this goes up to 2019. On my next slide, I'll bring you up to the present. You see this gap between white and black here in 2019 is 30 points. And if you go all the way back to 1940, the gap is 30 points. So the gap is the same. Even though home ownership rates among all groups have risen, that gap has not closed. And here's just to bring us all the way up to 2022. So that head start and that generational wealth made a huge difference. And we can't close that gap without understanding that history. So let me just show you a couple other ways that the past. So here's the median net worth of a homeowner compared to a renter. So you can see that, home ownership is how we generate wealth. If a couple of generations of your family were shut out of this opportunity and ended up over here, you're going to be starting from behind. So this is one that here's another slide that often blows people's minds. And this is from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. Here you have wealth by race and education. You'll hear sometimes people saying, well, people don't have wealth because they didn't work hard or something like that. But take a look at the average wealth of someone with a high school education by race. So here is the average wealth of a white person with a high school education. It's $115,000. Now, a black person has to go to graduate school before their wealth is going to meet the wealth of a white person with a high school education. And this, again, is due to the generational wealth and the fact that to get these degrees, people have to go into debt, which takes away from, their total. So finally, and this is the final point, if we're looking at, this is from our snapshot of race and home buying, we're looking at how people come up with their down payment. So this is a source of down payment by race. And this one that I've circled here is proceeds from the sale of a primary residence. So that means, sold your house, you're buying a new one. Mm-hmm. And it's 41% of white folks who are using the proceeds of the sale. Look, it's less than half of that for Blacks and Asians and just about half for Hispanics. So you can see that there's this history of home ownership and wealth building among white Americans that was stopped from occurring because of historic housing discrimination. And that was a really long answer to your question. Why do we have the Fair Housing Act?
It wasn't long, it was factual, and it was needed, and we love data. So thank you for sharing that, Alexia. And someone asked about the slides. The slides will be shared. And what you were just sharing now, that is from a report that is published yearly, correct?
Yeah.
So everyone has access to that, but Savannah will make sure that the members do get it. So if you don't mind, we'll proceed.
Absolutely.
All right. So, we wanted to get into some of the questions because here we do want to make sure that everyone has a voice. So, someone did submit a question, and I want us to kind of delve into it. Why do we keep talking about diversity when most of my market is the same race or background? And that's a really interesting question to me because there's so many types of diversity. There's age, it's where you're from geographically, your beliefs. So I want us to kind of dial into that a little. But it's kind of perceived that that's all that diversity is. So because of the history you told, it's that association, right? So what can you say about that?
Yeah. Well, look, it's true that the Fair Housing Act was passed in the first place because of widespread discrimination in this country on the basis of race. There was also widespread discrimination on the basis of religion and national origin. So that's country where you're from during the time of the Fair Housing Act. So that is our history, and these gaps are present. And so that is why we put a lot of emphasis on race. But, I mentioned there are 6 other protected classes. And, if that particular class is not a concern in your market, then I would point you to present day fair housing complaints. The number one cause of a fair housing complaint is based on disability. And I just learned this morning that 1 in 4 adults in America identifies as a person with a disability. So I don't think any of us could say that's not an issue in our market. So, the law protects these different categories for a reason. These are all members of our communities that have had their access to housing denied or hindered because of their identity. And we want a free and open housing market where all the members of our community can do transactions without having this artificial discrimination stop them. And so we talk about these different facets of identity because we're committed to treating consumers fairly, holding ourselves to the high standard, and meeting consumers where they are. That means understanding their needs to the best of our ability so that we can help every qualified buyer who walks through the door.
Thank you for that. So you said disability, huh?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's number one.
Number one. Okay, thank you for that. And would you say that most, and I'm kind of throw this in here, would you say most people are a part of a protected class in general?
Yes. And this use of the term protected class kind of bothers me, or I feel like people don't quite get it, because race is a protected class. That means you cannot be discriminated against because of your race, no matter what your race is. So if you're discriminated against for being white, that's illegal. So yes, if you have a race, if you have a gender, if you have a national origin, if you have a religion, it doesn't matter which one, right, you're a member of a protected class.
Thank you for that clarity. All right. So with that, now that we've got that clarity, what are some of the behaviors that you think that we can be careful about just to make sure that we as Realtor members are on the right side of the law? And with that, if you're able to give us some cases, because cases are real life and maybe someone can identify with some of those.
Absolutely. Yeah, the cases are the best way to learn about this stuff, not kind of theory. So we've had some very highly publicized cases of discrimination in real estate over the years. If you all haven't seen the Newsday investigation from 2019, this is required viewing for anyone who wants to see what not to do. That investigation was launched by a newspaper whose own reporters felt that they had been steered by real estate agents when they were house hunting. And the reporters of the newspaper felt that the real estate agents were trying to send them to neighborhoods based on their identity. And so the newspaper launched this 3-year investigation using hidden cameras and caught real estate agents on camera. Let me just give you a few examples of what was found on camera, but I really suggest that you watch they made it into a documentary. It's under an hour. So for example, we saw an agent tell a minority buyer that she couldn't see homes without being pre-qualified. when the white tester came in and wasn't pre-qualified, she said, "When can you start looking?" So the issue here isn't that she asked for people to be pre-qualified, but you can do that. It's just that you have to apply that rule consistently. Now we saw another agent, this one in that video, say to a buyer about a diverse neighborhood. He said, "You don't want to live over there. It's like the UN." And I'm thinking, well, that sounds awesome. But, you know, he clearly thought that that was a bad idea for his clients to move into that neighborhood. So those seem like pretty clear examples of agents denying service or limiting people's choices based on their identities. So check it out. Now, let me give you a couple more.
Sure.
Here's one from the property management context. And I know we have a lot of members involved in property management, so I'm not just going to keep it all real estate sales. So in a case we saw last year, a couple sued their landlord under the Fair Housing Act for discrimination based on familial status. So again, that's whether you have children in the family. So this couple had a 6-year-old son, and the landlord's lease had a no children clause. Pro tip, guys, that's illegal, okay? Don't put that in your lease. You're only allowed to forbid children if you are a 55 and older community and like meet a lot of very specific qualifications. But that protected class was added to the Fair Housing Act because of situations like this. And we in America decided we want to make sure that families with children can have housing and not get turned away because they have kids. So in this case, the landlord had a lease that said no children, but he included a handwritten amendment stating that the lease contract is being entered on a trial basis. Now, later that year, the wife became pregnant with her second child. And after she gave birth, 2 weeks after she gave birth, they received the eviction letter, demanding that they vacate because they had violated the no children clause. So the jury awarded compensatory and punitive damages, and it was like about $75,000 in damages that family received. So, you know, this is pretty basic stuff, like don't put no children in your lease. But unfortunately, there's, you know, not enough fair housing education out there. So let me give you one more example, Tikola.
Okay.
And this is a different kind of a case. This is one where it's not the real estate professional who's discriminating. It's a private party, but you have to deal with it. So there was a story out of Virginia that was written about in the New York Times last summer. In that case, the couple, they were 2 Black doctors, wanted to buy a condo, and they had like a virtual tour, and they made an offer, and it was accepted sight unseen, except for the virtual offer, so the virtual tour. So I guess that's not sight unseen, but they came down for the inspection to see it in person. And this is when the seller saw their race. The seller, an older white woman, said, "I'm not going to sell my condo to those people." She told her agent and several neighbors. Now, the details after that are murky, but what we do know is that the word got back to the buyers, and apparently the buyers' agents did not know how to advise them, because the woman, the female half of the couple, who just so happens to have a massive social media following because of her program educating children on science, which is extremely popular, she went on Twitter and said, "Hey, somebody just said that they don't want to sell me a condo because I'm Black. Is this legal?" And Twitter had to answer her question because none of the real estate agents involved gave her the advice and told her about her rights. And it was also on Twitter where her story blew up and became viral. That was where the New York Times heard about the story, and that's how we got the front page story. the seller's brokerage, just to finish out this story, they tried to clean up the mess. They brought in the older woman's adult children to try to persuade their mom to go through with the deal. They brought their mom around. She said, okay, I'm going to go through with the deal. They tried to put it all together, but the deal fell apart. And the listing agent's brokerage ended up paying a settlement to the buyers. So there's yeah.
And that was in the Times, and that was true, and that was really a story. You didn't make that up, right?
Oh, no, you can look in the Times. And, I think the important point here is that the real estate agents were sort of stuck in this situation, and they had to deal with someone else's discrimination, and it ended up hurting all the parties in the transaction.
Right. So, I say that because, yes, I did read that. I want to make sure that everyone knows these are cases that Alexia is recounting. And that didn't sound like it went so well. When I hear that, the buyer sounds like they missed out on their condo that they loved. And the agents that were supposed to be dealing with all of this and the party and the law, how did that work out? Not so great, right?
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
Yeah, there's a couple different issues here. I mean, first of all, if you're the listing agent, you have to remind your seller that the Fair Housing Act applies to them too. The Fair Housing Act does not just apply to professionals. It applies to anyone who is selling a house. So if your seller is expressing to you that they want to discriminate against a buyer based on their identity, you have to tell your seller that the law applies to them and that both they and you could be held liable if you go forward with that seller's plan. And if the seller, refuses to change, then you have to fire your client. Now, on the other side, the buyer side, her agents didn't give her any information about fair housing, and that's what sent her to Twitter and made it go viral. If her agents had talked to her about, this was illegal and pointed her towards some resources, there might have been a way for them to patch it up, but at least they might have prevented, this reputational situation that happened for them.
So to tie that up in a nice little bow, if there is another party that's doing something that could impact the buy or sale of my client's home, what should the realtor do?
So on the listing side, again, you have to remind their client the law applies to them. Your client, the law applies to them too. On the buy side, first thing, inform your broker about what's going on. In this case, in Virginia Beach, the brokers got involved. They tried to fix it. It didn't work, but tell your client about your local fair housing center, your local, your state, local or federal, fair housing enforcement agency. You can share fair housing information with them. We have lots of it on our website. But ultimately, the choice about whether to make a complaint or, how to handle the situation is up to the buyer. Maybe they want to save the deal. Maybe they want to work it out. A complaint's not going to work to save a deal. You're going to have to work it out some other way. But the client has to be in the driver's seat. It's up to them how they want to handle it. But you have to give them all the information and all their options.
Great. So we have to have the information and then we allow our clients to make that decision.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. So these cases are great. And this has been so super helpful. Since we're doing that, there's a few more questions, if you don't mind, if we keep you a little longer, from some of our members. And so I'm going to read this question, get my glasses. How do I defend myself from being falsely accused of discrimination? That's one. And someone else asked, I've heard some people play the race card when they don't get a house. Is that something we have to deal with? And I did that because there were quotes. I was reading a quote and there were quotes in the quote. All right. Just so we're clear. The first question, how do I defend myself from being falsely accused of discrimination? And then the second part is, I've heard some people play the race card when they don't get a house. Is that something we just have to deal with? Those are questions from our pre-questions that we received. What are your thoughts?
No, we certainly don't have to deal with that. I think that the best way to protect yourself from a false claim of discrimination is to follow the fair housing best practices. If you're providing consistent service to every customer, if you're treating each customer with equal dignity and respect, I say you set yourself up pretty well. And when somebody makes a claim of discrimination, it is very thoroughly investigated. These are legal claims, and I don't think a false claim is going to get very far.
Okay. All right. So I'll move on from that. Is there anything you wanted to elaborate on with that one?
No.
Okay. All right. Moving on. So we had another interesting question too. You ready? So, in my experience, I don't see a lot of false claims of discrimination. What I think people are seeing as I speak with some people, they see far more cases where people are too afraid to report because they're not really sure if this is what they're feeling. So instead of saying, I'm going to blow the whistle, oftentimes people say, I'm not sure what that was. Maybe I should say nothing. So in that case, how does that work?
Yeah, I hear that a lot too, Tikola, and I've not heard of false claims, but I do hear about, in a lot of cases, people see something, but they don't say something because they don't want to put themselves at risk. It takes a lot of guts for most people to come forward and file a complaint and enter like an adversarial process where you're going to be investigated. I mean, most people don't want to get tied up in that kind of thing. But I will tell you that I go to conferences with fair housing groups, and I have heard more than one fair housing center come up and tell me, it was a real estate agent that gave me this tip. It was a real estate agent that told me that they saw something that was wrong. And that was how we got the tip, and that was how we made the case.
I do have to say this, and I can't say who, but I do have some great folks in this state that will pick up the phone if they smell something that does not smell right, of all types, will call and say, does this sound right? Does this smell right? So the members that are doing that, I say, keep doing it, keep asking the questions. If it doesn't feel right, it may not be. And it may just be that you're on alert, which is also great. So I wanted to just say that as well. And with best practices, maybe you do call someone if you don't know the answer. But what are some best practices, Alexia, since we're talking about that we can implement in our business just to make sure that we're doing right by all of our clients? Because I know, look, we mess up. We make mistakes, right? I do. I'm the first to say it. You do. We all do. So what are some of the best practices that can kind of make sure that we do the right thing?
Yeah, it's true. We all make mistakes. We're only human, and in the fair housing area, we need to be really careful about implicit bias, because that can cause us to treat people differently or unfairly without our intention, or maybe even without our awareness. So, Tikola, I know you're one of the instructors of our implicit bias course. Just very briefly. Implicit bias is part of this process that our brains use of making shortcuts to get you through your day. They help you navigate the world quickly without having to think about a lot of things too much. It's like, I've been in this situation before. I know what this is. Boom. It's one of those. I'm moving on with my day. Or, one example I sometimes use is you get in your car and you start driving, you start thinking about something, and then you're at your destination. You don't even remember driving there, but you were on autopilot. So your unconscious brain was driving you while your conscious brain is thinking about, oh, my to-do list, what am I making for dinner, or whatever. So we have this unconscious brain that's doing all this work for us. And the issue is when your unconscious brain and those shortcuts you're using, when you say, oh, I know what that is. Yeah, I'm moving on. It's when those are based on stereotypes. And if you have shortcuts about people, now you can run into a fair housing problem. We don't want to be categorizing people and using shortcuts and stereotypes to draw conclusions about people. You don't want to look at someone and say, oh, that's an FHA buyer. Oh, that person definitely is going to want to live, in this neighborhood. We need to be very careful that we aren't making assumptions and that we're letting the client lead. And so that we're not making assumptions, we're asking questions. So Tikola, you talk a lot in our course about the different tactics you can use just to check yourself, make sure you're not making assumptions, make sure that you're meeting each client as an individual, really asking everyone the same questions to get the same information. And the key here is consistency. Consistent processes and procedures are going to be your guardrails, because you're going to have an off day, you're going to have a bad day, maybe you're going to be in a rush with someone, maybe you're not going to be as polite, but these guardrails can kind of help keep you on track. And think about these moments like client intake, like signing that buyer broker agreement, housing search, where are these moments where you can implement more consistency in your business, just so that you're just repeating the same thing every time and that becomes your routine. Tikola, I don't know if you want to add anything more. Just basically,
I think you said it. The consistency is key, because how many days it takes to create a habit, right? When you create those really good habits and you do put yourself on that autopilot, it's the right autopilot. It's not the shortcut that will get you in trouble. So I think you said it perfectly. Thank you for that.
Yeah, let's get ourselves on the good autopilot.
Yeah. The good autopilot is always a great thing. So we're really into this. I think we might have some questions. I'm not sure, additional questions, but I want us to talk a little bit about AI, since it's all the thing right now. AI and marketing. So some of this, I don't know if I'm sure you have read some of the studies about what that looks like in terms of how AI detects things and where it gets its facts from and so on. Someone asked this: why is it a violation in your marketing if you're just reporting the facts? So how would you answer that?
Yeah, well, there's so much confusion in this area of marketing. And I know that there are like different color coded lists with red, yellow, and green floating around out there. I'm sorry to tell you that none of those lists are official. None of them come from HUD. They've all been made up by different groups. And unfortunately, some of them conflict. So let me see if I can help us navigate our way out of this confusion.
Please do.
So a little bit of history, because we need to know why we have this part of the Fair Housing Act. The Fair Housing Act does regulate marketing, because back before that law passed, you would see an ad or a listing that would say something like, no Jews or Catholics. Or you would see an ad that would use the word restricted neighborhood, which back then was code for restrictive covenants. It means that the properties in this neighborhood all have covenants in their deeds that say they can be sold only to white people. So when the Fair Housing Act was passed, this was one of the issues that they wanted to address, was marketing. And so the Fair Housing Act says that it will be illegal. I'm going to get a little bit legal on you. It shall be illegal to make, print, or publish any notice, statement, or advertisement that indicates a preference, limitation, or discrimination based on the protected classes. Okay, so let's break that down. What does that mean? So we're going to repeat again the key part. It's indicates. So you're giving somebody a message with this marketing, a preference, limitation, or discrimination. So courts have said that if something in your ad indicates to a buyer that there's a preference, a limitation, or discrimination, that's a violation. So if there's something in your ad that suggests to someone, I'm not going to be welcome here, I will be discriminated against here, people like me aren't allowed here, that's when it's a violation of the Fair Housing Act. Now, how do we You okay, Tikola?
I'm in the building. I think they're fixing something. Go right ahead.
Okay. So how do we determine whether somebody would say would get that indication? Well, here's another thing the courts have done. The courts have created this fictional ordinary person, and the courts say, would an ordinary person, so not the most sensitive person, not the least sensitive person, just your regular, average, ordinary person, would that person read this ad from that protected class group and say, I'm not welcome here? That's the key question. So let's look at some examples. Okay. Master bedroom is one example.
Okay.
And I understand Canopy has gotten rid of master bedroom from its MLS. Now, HUD said definitively in the 1990s that the phrase did not violate the Fair Housing Act because it described an architectural feature and because the test I just mentioned, would your average ordinary Black person read that phrase, master bedroom, and think, I'm not welcome here. I'm going to be discriminated against. They don't want people like me here. And Tikola, we talked about this before. I mean, I think your average person is not going to feel that way. Now, there might be some consumers and others who don't like that term. And, we want to be sensitive to them. And so, maybe, the Canopy MLS took it out. I know they don't say that term on like HGTV anymore. But the Fair Housing Act doesn't mind that term, master bedroom, because it doesn't give that indication of a preference, limitation, or discrimination. Now, let me contrast that, Tikola, with another example. So we've seen some listings where the listing photos included a picture of a Confederate flag.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll ask you, Tikola. I mean, you're not an ordinary average person. You're like super special. But let's pretend that you're the ordinary average Black person and you're looking at a listing and you're seeing a Confederate flag. Would you think, I may not be welcome at this property. I could be discriminated against here. I don't think this is the house for me.
That's a fair assumption. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So you can see the difference between master bedroom and Confederate flag.
Oh yeah.
So when you're doing, one is an explicit symbol of racial exclusion, and one is just a term that we've been using for a long time, and so. When you're writing your ads, I have a few best practices, but keep that in your mind. Would somebody read this ad and think, I'm not welcome here? Like, I get all kinds of funny questions like, walk to the beach. Can I say that? Well, do you think a person in a wheelchair would read walk to the beach and think they don't want people in wheelchairs here? Probably not. I mean, but still, maybe you could say 3 blocks to the beach. That's more accurate anyway. So let me give you a few more best practices. And this is really a key one with your marketing. Describe property, not people. Okay. Right. So don't say who your ideal buyer would be. Don't say ideal for, because you don't know who's going to buy that house. You want your listing to convey openness that anybody could buy this house. So keep that information objective and factual. And somebody asked, now, if I'm just reporting the facts, why is that a violation? Well, it's not. There's no problem with reporting the facts. The problem is when you start to get subjective and offer opinions. But offering facts is never a problem. Now, on the AI piece, and look, I'm just learning about this myself. Actually, our Fair Housing Month event that NAR is sponsoring on Facebook Live on April 10th, we're going to have a panel on the future of fair housing and technology. So there's like AI experts on there that can go way deeper into this than I can. But I will just say that if you're using ChatGPT or something to write your listings or your ads, like, I don't think ChatGPT has been trained on the Fair Housing Act. So I would just be really careful when you use AI that you go over it before you inflict it on any consumers, because we've seen a lot of cases where AI gets things wrong. And hopefully, we're all excited about this technology and we want it to get better. But I think we have to and find those places where it can make our businesses more efficient, whatever those are. I don't know. I'm not an expert, but we should always be checking on these fair housing things.
Mm-hmm. So I have a question, if you don't mind, Alexia, from the chat, if you will. It says, with the changes within the new administration to DEI, equal rights, how does that affect fair housing?
Yeah. Well, like I said, fair housing isn't DEI, so the Fair Housing Act still exists. No executive order can do away with it. I will say that, well, we don't know for sure yet what's happening at HUD. This is a fast-moving situation, but we have heard that there is going to be a massive reduction in force at the Office of Fair Housing, cutting the staff by 75%. We've also seen that DOGE tried to cancel some grants to the local fair housing centers. You may have some of these in your community. Most of them get funding from HUD. DOGE tried to cut grants that had already been awarded, and some of these fair housing centers were like laying people off. They did sue, and they won their first round in court. The judge said they had to give the money back. So this is all changing quickly, but I think the one thing we can probably say is that we're not going to see a lot of federal fair housing enforcement over the next few years. And that means that things are going to, our states and localities are going to really have to lean in. And we need to lean into our communities and, supporting these organizations that may be getting less federal support. And I would also say I work here in Washington. We publish our Washington reports constantly, our team. So we're always keeping an eye on what's happening. We're having behind the scenes conversations. So I'll put in the chat where you can follow our Washington reports, where we're constantly giving updates on what's going on and what we're doing.
Thank you. We would so appreciate that. And thank you to our members that I got that one on the fly. So thanks so much for answering that. If we'll move forward, you're good? Let me make sure we're good. All right. So we're wrapping up soon, but there's a few things that I think are really exciting that I think our members need to know. NAR has been doing a lot over the past 2 years. So can you do me a favor and tell our members what are some of the resources that they can take advantage of?
Yeah, well, we've already talked about bias override. That's one of our CE courses. And I spoke to you a little bit about that content. Tikola, I think it's a great course. What do you think?
Oh, I think it's awesome. Maybe I shouldn't be biased, but I love the course.
Well, hey, at least you're conscious of your bias, and that's the first step.
Right.
So that's one of our courses. We also have Fairhaven, and we just launched Fairhaven 2.0. So really excited about, we've added a bunch of new scenarios. We've now got emotional assistance animal. We've got sexual harassment. We've got lending discrimination. Again, and a lot of the scenarios in Fairhaven are somebody else is discriminating against my client. What do I do? So like the lending discrimination scenario is based on a true story of a woman who qualified for the loan until the lender saw that she was going out on fully paid maternity leave. And he said, we're not, she was a doctor. They said, well, we don't know if you're going to go back to work after your fully paid maternity leave. So never mind, you can't have a mortgage. So we have a scenario based on that in Fairhaven. It's how do you guide your client? How do you help your client? The other cool thing about Fairhaven 2.0 is we talk about this history that I've explained to you, and we try to bring the history to life by, we went into the NAR archives and pulled out a bunch of old documents and photos, and then we had these animators like animate these things. And so we hope that it makes the history interesting and engaging. So super excited about Fairhaven 2.0. It's a free member benefit, fairhaven.realtor. Check it out.
And does that count for anything? Will that count for anything for the members?
Yes. And I think Savannah might touch on this again at the end, but yes. So NAR established its fair housing training requirement last year, and it's now in effect this year on this code of ethics cycle. And so Fairhaven is our free online. You can do it in the middle of the night in your pajamas. You can take a break and come back later. That's our free online course that satisfies the requirement. But there's lots of other courses you can take to satisfy the requirement.
Awesome.
And then we have our Fair Housing Champion Award. So this is where we highlight members who are doing amazing things in their communities. We've sponsored by Realtor.com, and these members get a video made about them, and they get a $5,000 grant to give to a housing-related nonprofit of their choice. So if you know a Fair Housing Champion, nominations open June 1st. Nominate somebody. And then finally,
we had our very own Sophia Crisp in 2020. I forget which year, but she was a Fair Housing Champion.
2022. Sophia is
amazing.
We were so thrilled to honor Sophia. I mean, Sophia raised the Black home ownership rate in one zip code by 30 points or something, just with one program that she did after a hurricane.
Super awesome. So there can be more. We have applications, right?
Yes, so the applications will be open during the month of June. So be the next Sophia. Although, do it in your own way.
Be yourself, right?
Our champions do all kinds of different amazing things. And we'll share that out with you all afterwards so you can take a look, because really the idea of these videos is meant to inspire people. And this is the culture change piece that we introduced kind of after the Newsday investigation, that we really want to inspire people and to showcase members who are doing great things so that other members can see, hey, I can do that too. And I want to do that. And then finally, we have these fair housing grants. So, if you want to do an event or a class, or if you want to go bigger and do legislative advocacy, we have grants from NAR to our state and local associations that can support that work. So there's lots of fair housing resources for you to get more engaged.
So cool. Thank you for sharing that. Those are all your resources, and they will be shared with you. I want to talk about some committee work, if you don't mind. We can do that real quick, that I'm super excited about. Can you just tell us a little bit more about what the fair housing, and that committee is fair housing policy, in case people did not hear in the beginning. What work are we doing that you can talk about on the Fair Housing Policy Committee at NAR?
Absolutely. And I'm going to keep this short because I'm watching the time and I feel like we've really given folks so much information today.
I know, fire hose, but it's good information. They can look at it again at their leisure.
So one of the issues our committee is looking at is appraisal bias. And so what we're focused on is creating some resources for members about how to work with an appraiser before the appraisal. And we've got some appraisers working with us on this. How to talk to an appraiser, what kind of information does an appraiser really want to see? We know that agents and appraisers may not speak the same language. How can you present the information ahead of time to make sure that value comes in accurately? And afterwards, if something seems off, how do you work with the lender to ask for reconsideration of value? So our committee is going to be creating some member resources around these things so members can feel more comfortable working with appraisers and appraisal. The other thing that we're leaning into this year is heirs property. And so I'll just briefly explain what that is. Heirs property is created when people inherit land without a will. It might look like, grandma left the home to her children and the grandchildren. And these heirs will inherit as tenants in common. And so after generations of ownership, you might have dozens of heirs in some cases, and that clouds the title. So that can be a real problem when you're trying to sell. But it can also be a problem when heirs are forced off their property. And we've seen this happen. And actually, there's a devastating movie based in North Carolina, Silver Dollar Road.
Yes, I've seen it. I think that's a great one. Yeah, it just spells it all out. It's not a great movie, but the concept, it's all there. It's all true. And it's currently still trying to be sorted out, you know?
Yeah, in that movie, there was a family who'd bought some land right after slavery, a Black family, and they had set up a couple of different businesses on the land. I think it was near the water, but it was heirs property, and there were a lot of different heirs, and a developer got one slice. So they just have to have one heir sell their little fraction, and then they can go to the court and order a court-ordered partition sale, which is done as a sheriff's auction, where it's, there's no appraisal. You have to bring cash. There's no financing. So these folks their land is being sold against their will, and they're not getting the full market value. So there's a couple of things we're doing here. First of all, there's a legislative fix to this heirs property problem. And I saw that actually in North Carolina, this bill is up for consideration in your legislature this year. The Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act. And NAR has policy support, encouraging our states to support this law. It would give some basic due process protections to people who own this kind of property so that they can't be forced off. And if a partition has to happen, that it's at least going to be sold by a real estate broker and they're going to get the full market value. So in our committee, we want to create some resources for members working with clients who are heirs property owners, both to prevent heirs property, which is all about estate planning. And I know people don't want to talk about their own demise, and that's a difficult topic. But if you're going to own property, you have to have a will. And then the other piece is cleaning up title. So we're going to create resources for members both before and after. So yeah, we're very excited about the work we're doing in the committee and your leadership, Madam Vice Chair.
Oh, thank you. It's great work. And we thank you for yours as well. So I'm going to roll into my thank yous and just we really appreciate you, Alexia, for coming in and giving us the information. And you apologize for being the legal, but that's just who you are. So we love it. That means we're getting the facts. And I thank NC Realtors for asking for this presentation because it was a wealth of knowledge. So if anyone else had any other questions, you can definitely get in touch with Alexia via email. She answers. Don't scare her coming out of the hallway at RLM, but yeah, definitely ask her any questions. If you did not know what to ask on this webinar, you can ask her directly. You can send questions to Savannah. We can get those answered, but we want to make sure that people did come to the table getting their questions answered. And Alexia, thank you so much for taking time to do this. And I'm super excited and look forward to all the work we're going to accomplish over the next 2 years.
I am too. Yay.
Yay.
Thanks for listening to NC Realtors Redefined. Be sure to never miss an episode by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or SoundCloud.